What's the difference between a really good musical theatre performer who you really enjoy watching and listening to, and a brilliant musical theatre performer who can reach their hand inside your guts and give them a twist? Well, arguably, one of those things is a real understanding of musical theatre history and having a strong contextual understanding of the piece that they're playing, the message that they're communicating, and the character that they are portraying. With me this week is performer and singing teacher, one in fact who was part of the first cohort for the BAST Training Level 5 qualification and who has just handed in her final assessment, Marie Walsh. Molly is a lecturer at Erdang here in the UK, where she teaches classes in musical theatre history. And she is here with me to geek out on the background of this wonderful art form, to discuss the many advantages of having musical theatre history understanding and the many ways we can actually get involved in that without having to sit with all the books. Marie Walsh, it's over to you. Molly, when I was at university, my favourite class was contextual studies, which seems maybe a little bit weird for somebody who is studying musical theatre. You would think maybe it would be singing or dancing, but no, it was the 2 to 3 hour lectures that we had on a Friday, and then we would all go across the road to the cafe. I think it was called Purple Jam in the day, and we would have a fry up. So it came to be known as Fry Up Fridays. So what was your experience of musical theatre history in training, and did you share that kind of zest for it as I did?
Yeah, I definitely did. I think I can make the same claim. Yep, total musical theater nerds in the house. Absolutely was one of my favorite classes. And I mean, it really started quite early for me. I always grew up with music and watched a lot of old movie musicals. That was kind of like my first taste. And then the minute I started to really get into like musical theater and performing, almost immediately at the same time of starting to perform, I started doing research because I loved reading. I know you do as well. So always going to the library. That was my favorite place. And I found this book that I have here, Broadway Musicals Show by Show. And I checked it out so many times from the library that it was either for the next birthday or Christmas that my mom just bought me my own copy. So I've had this copy since I was 13 years old. Yes. So musical theater history nerd through and through. And this is basically, if you look at the format, it looks a lot like the way that Wikipedia pages are designed. So that shows my age, that this is like pre-Wikipedia, but this is basically what Wikipedia is. And you cross-reference it. It's got lists in the back, and it's absolutely brilliant. So that was my first book. And then once I got to university, when we had our musical theater history course, I was very, very happy.
Is there a particular musical theatre era or part of MT history that you're particularly passionate about, either as a scholar or as a performer?
Yeah, I've actually thought about this a lot recently, especially as I've gone through teaching now at a university program here, that I've discovered that I think the late 60s and the early 70s are a really exciting time, probably particularly the 70s. I mean, you've got really groundbreaking musicals for a lot of different reasons. I mean, in 1971, you get Company. In 1975, you get The Wiz. 1975, you also get A Chorus Line and Chicago. Oh my goodness. I mean, what a year. And then you also get, I'm going to forget the year, but you get Rocky Horror Picture Show as well in the UK. So a lot of really, really significant musicals for different reasons. And there was just a lot of experimentation. You're finally getting a variety of stories and voices being told, marginalized people, that their voices are finally being lifted up, and musicals that are still like really significant today. Probably a lot of that had to do with the fact that that was my mother's era. She was a performer as well. So those were the things that she loved. So it was probably one of my first few exposures to musicals, but still, they still remain like that's a really exciting time in musical theater history.
And what's your favourite musical of all time?
Oh, that's the hardest question. My students ask me that. My children ask me that. It's so hard. I'd have to say my favorite movie musical, because I grew up with it, is Singing in the Rain. And that really fits the category of spectacle and escape musical and like comedy, which I love. I love tap. I love comedy. I love just sing a big high note and do a time step. Great. We love it. Probably the next one would be, because I love Sondheim, is Into the Woods. Is perfect. And it means something different every time I grow. It meant something different when I was a kid to when I was an adult to now being a mother. And it just amazes me every time how he could write so many different points of view, ages, genders, so deeply. He just understands the human experience. So Into the Woods probably would be next. Yeah.
There are so many. And really, we don't just have one. We usually have a whole handful.
It changes all the time. And if you have to pick one playing now, Hadestown.
Yeah, I'm totally with you.
The vocal and musical displays, unbelievable. And it's a spectrum. You're not just getting one voice type. The story is so significant. It is sad and uplifting at the same time. I've seen it twice with completely different cast here in the UK. The experience of the audience, it is truly like what makes theater worth it, is that coming together of the audience and the performers. It really is this like shared moment. I think it's an interesting choice, Hadestown, because the story of Orpheus and Eurydice also have a place within the history of musical theater specifically. If you're going to read books on musical theater history, you're going to kind of see a trend that the earliest influences of musical theater will often be listed as vaudeville, burlesque, minstrelsy, which is incredibly problematic, and operetta. And one of the earliest examples of operetta is Offenbach's Orpheus and Eurydice. And operetta means light opera, and it usually involves a comic story as opposed to the grand operas or the bel canto operas that tend to be more dramatic. So operetta was always satirical and often commented on the society it was from. So the original Orpheus and Eurydice was commenting on like the French aristocracy, and now jump to 300 years later, and that story is still serving the same purpose. And knowing that, I think as a performer, it just gives you that extra weight when you're passing that story on to the audience, and changes your vocals as well.
As part of your work as a singing teacher, you lecture in musical theatre history at Erdang, a performing arts institution here in the UK. Students attending these lectures, they're performers. Perhaps they don't quite understand how relevant this contextual side is to their practical training. Can you give us an example of a time where applying an understanding of a particular context has had significant influence on a performance?
Yeah, so that's absolutely true. So many, especially when you're training and you're really young, other than maybe you and I who love doing the research. Why do you get into performing? Why do you get into musical theater? It just makes you feel good. Probably you came at it either because you love the different dance styles, or, you love the challenge of like singing a high note or singing a particular song. But then what we're trying to do at university level is develop a deeper understanding, a deeper connection to the material and to the genre, to build a long-lasting career. Not just, I'm going to do this because I like to kick my face and sing a high note, which I still love to do, but how is that going to be long-lasting? So my example is probably from teaching my younger students. I teach at a dance studio, and I work with ages 6 to 18. So my seniors are age about 11, 12 to 18. And we were just doing the opening number of 9 to 5. And, we just started with staging and learning the words. And then after a couple times going through it, I kind of was watching the way they were performing and their acting. And so I just asked them, I was like, do you know when this is set? And, they're really enjoying the dancing, the music. They enjoy the lyrics and the way that they get to sing, because it kind of is contemporary. But they weren't sure about the time period. They guessed, maybe the 1950s. I said, no, it feels like it, but it is actually the 1980s. And trying to ask them, what did we not have in the 1980s. And, they did say smartphones. And I said, yeah, what else? And then they said TV, which I said, hold on, I'm not quite that old. We did have TV. But I did say, we didn't have the internet. And there were a lot of one student said something like free will. And she wasn't totally off. So I said, yeah, let's get some context. So when did we get the vote? 1920, but it wasn't everybody. And then by 1980, women were only just allowed to open a bank account without the signature of their father or a husband, which my students were completely shocked. And then there was just no protection in the workplace on behavior from men. And you got paid half as much as the men who did the same job as you. Sometimes you were more experienced, but they would get a promotion over you. Let's sing it again. And it completely changed their facial expressions, their energy, and their vocal tone. Instead of singing, working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living, with a smile, they sang it with an eye roll, working 9 to 5, what a way to make a living, which feeds into their whole body and their voice and completely tells us a different story. So even just that tiny bit of context made a huge difference. And it also lights them up because then they have a reason to do the choreography and a reason to sing it.
Theatre has been a vehicle for social commentary, and it's a mirror of what's happening around us. That has been a theme throughout the entire history of theatre. We only have to look back to maybe Shakespearean times when King James was on the throne and Shakespeare wrote Macbeth.
Because James was a Scottish king, but also the King of England. And he was also obsessed with witches. That's when the first witch hunt took place. So was Shakespeare writing it to make him happy? Yes. But was it about the witches being bad? No, it was about the monarchy and the weight of the king. So it was already subversive. Yeah, absolutely.
And fast forward to a particular era that comes up in training, particularly in musical theatre training in performing arts institutions, legit. And I know that you do not like that term, which is...
No, okay. I don't like the word legit because it has a Western classical lens, and it basically means this is the legitimate way of singing and everything else is other. So there are a lot of teachers who are starting to try and change the language. I like to say classical because that is kind of the category it fits in. And so I will acknowledge that a lot of things still say legit, but I will prefer to say classical. Yeah, language is important. We know this, so it's starting to change. But yes, legit singing or classical singing is very important in your training.
And we get Rodgers and Hammerstein as one of those staples. And they too were telling humanitarian stories through the likes of South Pacific, for example. Will we actually lose a bit of that authentic communication if we have not done our research into what this social commentary actually is trying to say? Is it enough to actually serve us with a wonderful pirouette and a tap routine? I hated tap, by the way.
This is where we disagree.
Is it enough to have a wonderful voice and really tight dance moves?
I saw an interview on Graham Norton with Olivia Colman and Helena Bonham Carter. So these are two legendary British actresses. And this was them promoting their season of The Crown that was about to begin. So they're playing Queen Elizabeth and Princess Margaret. And Graham Norton asked them, do you both do a lot of research because you're playing real historical and, at the time, living figures? And they both looked at each other and started laughing. And Helena Bonham Carter said, oh, yes, I do all the research. I read all the books. I try to find anybody and do interviews, and I watch footage. So she does all the research. And then Olivia looked very embarrassed and was like, nah, I don't do anything. For her, it's all like instinctive and emotional. But both of those performances are brilliant. And they're both equally talented actresses. They just come at it from a different way. So it's not always going to be the thing that works, but it's nice to have it as an option. You'll often get people who are not in theater who might say, "Oh, I don't like musicals." And to that, I always say, you haven't met the right musical yet. Because there is a musical for everybody, and there is a place for a lot of different kinds of musicals. Like there's a place for a lot of different kind of storytelling. It doesn't always have to carry weight, but even the most lighthearted musical, oftentimes when you just do a tiny bit of research, you'll realize that there was a reason that they needed lighthearted musicals. Like a lot of those tap musicals came from the 1930s, and there's a great book that was actually edited by one of my friends. I'm going to hold it up, Robert Schneider, 50 Key Musicals, and he dubs the 1930s the Champagne era. And I think that's perfect because you're getting the rise in Hollywood movie musicals. You're getting Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers, Eleanor Powell, a lot of tap dancing and a lot of spectacle. And then it's feeding into, the Gershwins and Cole Porter and Irving Berlin, songs that still today people sing and just feel good and feel happy. But what was happening in America in 1930 was the Depression. There was a massive stock market crash. Not only was there a depression, we still had prohibition, and in the middle of the country was the Dust Bowl. So you had damage to farmland and people had to leave. So they went west to California to escape this weather that was destroying their way of living. So then you look to the art that's being created and it's escapist. It's not going to be musicals about the Dust Bowl. It's going to be musicals about people on a fancy cruise ship who get mistaken identities and sing about being you're the top. Because we can't deal with it all the time. We can absolutely relate to that when you think about what we wanted during the pandemic. At the beginning of the pandemic, I think most of the things we wanted to consume were going to be ways to make us feel good. And then after that, we could reflect and say, you know what? We need to actually deal with this story. And it's the same thing in the 1930s. So by the time you get to the late 1930s, you're going to get some more politically active pieces of theater like Cradle Will Rock, Porgy and Bess, even Of Thee I Sing. But even those lighthearted musicals, they have a reason to be there. So even when you're like, oh, all I want to do is sing and dance, and it makes you feel really good to do this time step, when you know that the audience needs it because of what they're dealing with, oh, it's just going to make it even more meaningful. So it just adds that extra weight to your performance.
So that vocal context of legit being the right way to sing, the correct way to sing, anything else is damaging or not the way we want to be heard. How does that kind of seep into the role of context in musical theatre to help us find our vocal targets?
Yeah, so I think we know now the science and learning of voice has really progressed in the last 20 years. And I think there's been a general consensus that it's okay to belt and that classical singing is not the only way, that correct singing is basically singing that is sustainable and doesn't feel painful, right? And then that can be any number of things. So yes, what is the point of continuing to sing in this old-fashioned style? Well, a lot of the time it's just honoring the intention of the original composer. And especially if you're doing something where you're telling a specific period piece, again, where you're literally using theater as history. It's another element, that vocal style is another element of transporting the audience directly back to that time and giving them a shorthand of understanding what it was like at that point in time. People sang a certain way. Okay, so that's going to maybe tell me the way that they stood, the way that they danced, the way that they spoke, because that's going to be different. The clothes they wore were different. Sometimes those things are more obvious when you're an actor and you put your costume on, you're going to stand differently and walk differently. But if you start internally with the way that you're going to sing and the way that you're going to speak, that's going to also help to deepen your performance, but also help to tell the story. And a great example of that is another Sondheim musical is A Little Night Music, which is all written in waltz time and is more of a classical style of singing. And I saw the revival a few years ago, And there were a couple moments where the ensemble sang a specific phrase, and I was expecting it to be more of a classical sound with a little more vibrato and a certain shape and timbre, but a lot of the ensemble members sung it in a bright, flat, pingy sound, even in their high soprano range. And it really took me out of the story because the vocal quality didn't match the costumes, the props, the sets, the dialogue. It was misaligned. And it took me out of experiencing the story and letting it wash over me. So I think it's really key to have that kind of consistency. Now, that doesn't mean that every time we do a classical piece, it has to always be told that way. I mean, you talked about Shakespeare. We are always seeing Shakespeare interpreted in different ways, set somewhere differently, but always for a purpose. So a great example would be this most recent Oklahoma revival. But they didn't just change one thing. They changed everything. They changed the setting to a more contemporary setting. They changed the design. They changed the orchestrations. The musicians were completely different from what was originally written. So therefore, the vocal quality also changed. Now, are you going to always like it? Maybe not. But they made all of that conscious change together as one unit. And in that sense, I think that is still honoring the root of the story. But if you are going to sing a classical piece in its original form and then throw in a modern riff or a sort of straight tone quality, it is going to feel jarring and make you go, whoa, what's going on there? And then also just on a note for a student who is learning, what most universities want you to do, most university programs want you to be able to do is just build your skill set. Fill up your toolbox. Now, you may decide by the time you finish your training that legit theater is just not something you like, not something that is inherent to you, and maybe you're not going to audition for those pieces. But you've learned how to do it, and you know what's required of you. But then on the flip side, maybe you've never sung legit before, and then you were pushed to try it, and you find, oh, I'm actually really good at it. That feels really good. I really like that sound. And that musical is really interesting. So now you've just like broadened your abilities. And then when you walk into an audition room, if you come in with a contemporary piece, maybe the people behind the panel say, that's really great. Do you have something totally different? And then you can completely flip the sound of your voice, and they are going to go, oh my gosh, they can do anything. A really great contemporary example is the performer Jessie Mueller, who played the original Jenna in Waitress. She's an amazing vocal chameleon. So she can be Jenna, and she also has played Carrie in Carousel. Sorry, not Carrie. She's played Julie Jordan in Carousel. She could easily sing it with a really contemporary sound, but she knows what the original version is, and then she can take a slightly more contemporary focus and use that classical voice, but then communicate maybe with a little more articulation, because a lot of the qualities of a classical voice are going to be, the vowels are all going to kind of blend together. But she can make a little more articulation in her soprano, but still sing in that classical quality. And then she's got this completely new version of Julie. Sierra Bodges is another one who does that really, really well. So it's just about expanding your abilities, broadening your perspective, and that can only be a good thing.
And I would say that if you are listening to legit musical theatre for the vocal targets that you're after, please listen to the original. Because
please!
There are a lot of times where, you know, being in a contemporary world now, listening to the music that we have around us, as you say, you may not have come across legit before, but listening to that 2019 revival of Oklahoma is so far removed from the original, 1943 musical, that you just can't take the same vocal targets away from that if you are doing that traditional sound. Equally, another musical that springs to mind because of the way that the costume and the voices are different, but it matches, is Hamilton. You've got such a contemporary rap-based vocal, but the costume is of its time and it's telling the story of America, Alexander Hamilton, King George III, but it's so well done because it's not a jarring juxtaposition. It works.
And that was intentional. That is the intention of the writer. And yes, the costumes are somewhat period piece, but not totally. It is a contemporary take on the period clothing, so they can still move in that contemporary way. And then obviously it was Lin-Manuel Miranda's intention to use modern musical language in order to elevate how revolutionary and how much of an outlier that group of people were in the 1700s. Because if he had used the music of the 1700s, we would have felt completely disconnected from that experience. But when you put all of these hip hop and pop references in, you're like, oh, I know what that is. Oh, so that person was kind of like that? Wow, I never thought about it that way. But then also, they're really, really smart in the orchestrations because the orchestrations include a string ensemble that would have been authentic to the period. And you may not even recognize it, but it's there. So it's giving you that 18th century sound and blending it with the modern sound. And yeah, in that sense, he's doing it on purpose. He's saying, I'm going to use this contemporary style because it's telling you about what it was like back then. So that's a slightly different use of music. Yeah, absolutely.
The amount of people coming into schools and studying and who have a real passion for this is amazing. And then when we leave and graduate and we go out into an industry, there's only one or two people up for the job at the end of the day, whether that's, whether that's playing the role, understudy, first cover, whatever. So in those times where we find ourselves out of work, we can pull on our other creative skills in order to keep our art alive, just in a different vein. So we might have an interest in songwriting or costume design or lighting design or whatever that might be still in theatre. And if we can have this understanding of what we're creating and why, because of this contextual understanding, then it allows us to create really intelligent and reflective stories.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I mean, again, when you have to think about the different kinds of performers and the different kinds of students you're going to get, I know it's not going to be for everybody. But the more that you can expand your skill set, the better off you're going to be, the longer your career is going to be. For some people, yes, you may get lucky enough that you just go from contract to contract. It does happen. There are people who do that. But for those that don't, they're going to have to think a little more creatively. And it's really, really common today to have a portfolio career. I mean, I do as a teacher and performer, as I'm doing both, but even just as a performer, you may need to get a little creative. I mean, I have a friend who has done 5 or 6 West End shows. So he could continue doing that, but he is also writing musicals with a writing partner. And now he is trying to build his career as a director. But he's not necessarily closing everything else off. He's just continuing to explore these things. And so you just never know sometimes when that's going to happen. You may graduate from university and be like, yep, that's it. I'm just going to pound the pavement and audition, audition, audition. But maybe you get 5 or 10 years in and then you go, oh, I think I want to try something else. And then maybe that bit of information that's just been sitting there is going to come to the forefront. But yeah, it is not going to be for everybody, but I do think that it's worth exploring.
At the beginning, we both said how much we nerded out in our contextual classes and training. But what does that say about people going into the industry with this element of versatility because of that contextual style? How can that help us in an audition situation, for example?
Yeah. So, I always say everything with the caveat that, I don't expect every performer or every student to be as into it as me. And first, it's nice that people bring different skill sets to things. But what I'm seeing in a positive way, what I'm seeing about young people and their training is vocal technique is getting so much stronger. And I am seeing so many young singers that have a really strong mixed belt and a really wide range. However, a lot of these singers can sing the same high note. They can all do it. So if 100 people come into the audition room and they can all sing that E5, F5 in the same exact way, how are we going to distinguish who gets the job? What's going to be next on that checklist of criteria for the people who are sitting behind the table? And that is going to be that it factor that we often have. You know, my friend always liked to say, you got moxie, kid. I don't know how to explain it, but you got moxie. So what is that? What is the it factor? It's that interpretation of the song. It's your perspective as an individual artist. And whether or not you just like to sing that high note, if you don't know why you're singing it, if you don't have a reason to sing it, it's not going to stand out against everybody else. So just knowing a little bit more about that background is going to be useful. Now, maybe you come with it from your own subtext. Maybe you have your own thought process and your own personal connection to the character that you're singing, and that will often be enough. That's the Olivia Colman side of like the emotional life that's boiling underneath. And that can be just as effective. But if that's not going to always work for you, then where is that storytelling aspect? A lot of it comes down to lyrics as well. I mean, I'm sure you experience this in the one-to-one voice lesson setting. And this actually can apply beyond musical theater. That you could have a student of any age and they could sing something and you can go, great. Do you know what that word meant there? And a lot of the time, if I'm asking, they don't know. Because you can tell when they sing it. And it doesn't mean that they have to like emphasize the word and make it so much louder than all the other words. But oftentimes when I say, do you know what that word is? And they go, no, not really. And sometimes that word has a historical or cultural reference that is just this little key. And once you tell them what it is, then they go, oh, and then they sing it again and it's just completely different.
This reminds me of an experiment I did when I was preparing for a vocology and practice webinar about authenticity in musical theatre. And I just did an experiment with the students I was meeting that week where I just asked them, can you perform a sneeze? Which I've been doing a lot of recently because of this hay fever. And most of them, I would say 80% of the people I asked went like this. Achoo! Not bad, we got the achoo. Yeah, I bought it that it was a sneeze. But then I was like, but what if it's the 100th time you've sneezed that day? What if it's a hay fever, tickly sneeze? What if you're feeling really poorly? What if it's just out of the blue? You know, there are so many things around that make a sneeze different. What happens after you sneeze? You don't just go back to what you were doing. You might need a tissue. You might sneeze again. You might go, if it's been that 100th sneeze. All of that builds context around a truth. And I think that it's the nuance of truth in a performance.
Yes, absolutely. That is such a great example. A sneeze. That's brilliant because it's completely involuntary. And that is kind of the goal for these songs, because why are we singing in musical theater? We're singing because we can't express how we're feeling through words anymore. So it does need to feel spontaneous. That's a great thing. I'm going to steal that.
Hey you! If you're enjoying the Singing Teachers Talk podcast, then don't forget to hit the subscribe button. We are committed to bringing you engaging conversations and valuable insights from experts across the field of voice. By subscribing, it means we can continue to do that. You'll never miss an episode, and you'll be helping to spread the word to other singing teachers, vocal coaches, and overall voice nerds. So subscribe to this channel now and just watch your teaching grow. When we first talked about getting together to do this, you had a really good quote, and I think it's a really great way to bring us on to our next point of upholding this craft that has had so many important foundations. Just remind us what that quote was.
Yeah, so it's from my university teacher, Charlie Gilbert, used it in musical theater history. And it's, we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us. And it's hard to say where the quote originates. I've tried to look it up, and I've heard other people using it for their context, but it's a great quote. I think it really sums it up, and it's why I feel so passionate and so honored to be doing theater, because it is such a long tradition that it just feels so much more important when you know that you're carrying on something that has existed before. People like to talk a lot about ancestors. Mm. And I think for a lot of people, if they have their cultural traditions, their religious traditions, then that can feel similar. So being in theater often feels like that. And knowing what was done before and why, and then going, how have we moved on from there? But also, how have we maybe gone backwards and we need to remember so that we don't repeat the same mistakes? Or maybe we revisit something and go, that is still so relevant, we should do that again. Something like Cabaret, which is, still running on the West End, was on Broadway, is just unfortunately closed. But
I think it's back now, isn't it? Because Marie Walsh is just about to go in with Billy Porter.
I think they're the last ones.
Are they? Okay, yeah.
Oh, and that's an interesting, oh my gosh, talk about like history within history within history, because I believe Marisha Wallace and Billy Porter might be the first two Black performers to be playing those roles. She has specifically done a lot of research when she wanted to play Sally Bowles. And one of her first questions was, were we there? And she's talking about Black people. Were they in Germany in the 1930s? And the answer is yes, absolutely they were. So her research gave her performance this extra weight, because she knew that she was representing a group of people that are not always included in that point in history, which is so important. I mean, one of the musicals that is now you're starting to see included in musical theater history is Shuffle Along, but it hasn't been included for a really long time. And it came out in 1921. It is often given credit for starting the Harlem Renaissance and like being one of the first musicals to have a jazz score and a tapping female ensemble. That is huge. And yet I, as a musical theater lover, did not even know about it until like 10 years ago. So rewriting those wrongs of history is also really significant. Going back and going, I feel like something's missing. And then figuring out what that is, that's a really exciting thing to see as well.
It's not uncommon for females, girls, to be more dominant coming into musical theatre auditions for drama schools and things. We see a lot more females coming in than maybe males in comparison. And I think that is an incredible thing to acknowledge, because women were not allowed on stage for a really long time. It only seemed to happen around the Restoration period that women started to be able to play roles. But before that, it was males in female costumes, or maybe having to put on a high voice, or they would use young boys whose voice hadn't broken. And so now that we are allowed on stage, that we have been permitted to be part of this. I mean, even back into music hall, song and supper clubs, women were not allowed there either. And the first music hall, the Canterbury Music Hall, I think, it was on the same site as the Canterbury Arms of Charles Morton. And he had ladies' night on Thursdays because he thought that it would bring a civilization to the male punters who were going to enjoy the evening. So there's so much of our female experience and our history as females that comes into this too.
That even goes into the creative side as well, especially when you look at the history of who was writing the stories. And that's something that my students would often notice. I think I had someone in the first year, I said, oh, do you prefer like this writer or this writer? And I think they were like, I feel like they just all kind of sound the same and they're just all a bunch of white guys. And, I was kind of like, well, yeah, you're not completely wrong. And you can go a little bit deeper in terms of like ethnic representation and like Jewish American writers, which at the beginning in the first like 1920s and the 1930s was really significant. Even into the 1960s, like Fiddler on the Roof is a really significant musical because actually those authentic Jewish traditions, and you have like Yiddish words appearing in the musical, had not really existed before. So it was really taking that culture seriously. But then it took so long for women to be behind the table, to be the writers or the directors or the choreographers. You do have Agnes de Mille in the 1940s, but it's very few and far between. So looking at women's voices, telling women's stories, I mean, we're only just experiencing firsts now. I mean, it was just a few years ago when Janine Tesori won a Tony. And you only had, I think last year, Shaina Tobe, who wrote the book, music, and lyrics to the musical Suffs, which is about the suffragettes, won separately for book and score. That's the first time in musical theater history that a woman has won for both, which seems absurd. So yes, those marginalized voices, it's really important to look back and question some of the older texts to say, is this including everybody? Because they did exist. She's not the only one. We did have female writers, just like talking about Shuffle Along. It wasn't the first all-Black musical. There were musicals in the 1900s, but they weren't as successful. The creatives often maybe died or didn't continue their success because of racism and classism. So they were there, but they have been left out. So trying to put them back in and remember those voices that don't often get included in history is really important.
Something that's caused a little bit of controversy recently is the revival of Evita, Jamie Lloyd's revival that's happening at the Palladium, I believe, where Rachel Zegler, who is currently playing Eva Peron, comes out into the public space by going onto the balcony and singing the famous song, Don't Cry For Me, Argentina. And there's been a bit of an uproar. It's made the news. I mean, great. Theatre's making news. Love it.
Publicity.
Yeah, take it. It's making headlines about, is it a bit unfair for the people who have paid lots of money for a ticket to then have somebody go out and not perform it on stage, but talk to the people below walking London streets? I'm like, if we can understand the context of why that isn't an amazing choice, about how representative it is of what Eva Peron was actually doing at the time, we would understand that so much better. And Rachel Zegler, who would have had probably no choice in that, would have had less criticism.
It really makes me want to shout, to be like, that is what the show is about. Jamie Lloyd is doing some really exciting, extreme things with theater, but he's always taking his nugget of an idea from the text. He's going, what is the element from the text? What is there in the story? And so it's always justified. It may not be to your liking, but there's a reason for it. And yeah, absolutely. Because when I heard about that, my first reaction was, that is so cool, because that is exactly what it's about historically. And we know also, on another note, that theater can be expensive and it really should be accessible to everybody, but it's not always. And to be able to find a way around that, to say, let's have her come out and sing on the street, which actually fits for the real life person and her relationship with the people. And then also bonus, you get to promote the show on the street during the performance. Yeah, I think that it's really important contextually to know that, because obviously when you have things like promotion, they like to go for the clickbait, don't they? But it would be nice in this day and age where we have information at our fingertips to be looking for the right bit of information.
When it comes to the ensemble of a piece, now they might say, well, I'm not playing the main role, I'm not playing Fantine, I am literally one of the factory workers and a lovely lady. Do I really need to know the context? Do I need to read that 1,000-page tome of a book to know what's going on? Why is the ensemble also going to benefit from this contextual understanding?
Okay, I want to say two things there. First of all, full disclosure, I have not read all of the original Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. I'm so sorry. I would say to my students when they are doing their research, I am not asking them to read the entire thing, especially when you have dense history books. They don't even have to be very big. I mean, this isn't very thick. This is one of our main texts. But I'm not asking them to read the whole thing. Use the index, use the contents, find the bit that's relevant. You don't have to do the entire thing. You can get really specific.
If anything, I would probably say don't read the chapter on the Battle of Waterloo because it is very hard going.
Yeah, it's not going to be for everybody. Primary sources are not going to be for everybody. As an ensemble member, how is it going to benefit you? Again, it's kind of similar to being in the audition room. A lot of the times what people are looking for in the audition process is like, is somebody going to be easy to work with? And that's kind of the same thing that carries over in the rehearsal room. Because oftentimes, even though you've gotten the job, you want to keep the job and you want to get the next job. So if you're going to think about it from a career perspective, if you're the person in the ensemble who, when the director says, okay, we're going to do the factory scene, so can I have everybody just like find a space, and I just kind of want you to like experiment with some actions. If you have no idea where you are, what those actions would be, and you kind of just stand there like with a contemporary pose, then the director's going to have to go, okay, can I have you do this and give you the work? Now, maybe you're going to have a director who does tell everybody exactly what to do, when to move. Yes, that does happen. But you also are going to get a lot of times, especially with an ensemble, especially with a scene that isn't going to be dance-based, where they are going to want to create the texture of the world that you're living in. And if you already know what kind of roles women would have had in the factory, how many hours would they have been working there, have they bathed this week, this month, how much food have you eaten, if any? That's going to completely change, give you so much information. And you can do that kind of research really, really quickly. I mean, we do say to like try to avoid things like Wikipedia, but it's going to give you a starting point to say, okay, I could kind of look at this book or look at this website or find this documentary or find this YouTube video that's like what was happening in France at this time for this kind of person. All of that stuff is available to you, and you don't have to spend hours and hours, and then it's just going to give you that immediate shorthand, and you can start playing. And then the director's going to be like, oh yeah, I really like working with that person because they just kind of like fill in the blanks for me. They're great, so I'm going to definitely use them again. That's a huge thing.
And without being crass, kind of tough shit. You do have to do this as part of your training. You will have contextual classes.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's like, well, you're here, aren't you? Don't you just want to do it? But yeah.
If anything else, just get on with it.
Give it a go. Just give it a go.
Yeah, you don't have to be a historian. You just need to be able to take the stuff that you think is going to be applicable. And this also brings us on to kind of where we can find the stuff to help us, because we don't have to be totally into books to find our truth. So let's start with books and just, just because they're our faves. But one that I quoted the crap out of at uni is Our Musicals Ourselves by John Bush Jones. That's a really great one. I've still got the pages kind of dog-eared where I was reading time and time again. Another one that I quite like is The Cambridge Companion to the Musical.
Yeah. There's a lot of those. There's a lot of those that are really good. The Cambridge Companion. There's one, I think, for rock musicals. I think there's also one for contemporary musicals.
And this one here, which always brings such humour, because when I first ordered it, the author is a lamb. So I just could only ever think about a lamb with a spectacle on, just in a field writing this wonderful book. But this is 150 Years of Popular Musical Theatre by Andrew Lamb, which is also pretty good. What about you, Molly? You've shared some with us already, but can you remind us what we should get for our bookshelves?
Yeah, so my like pre-Wikipedia book was the Broadway, the American Musicals, but that doesn't go to contemporary. I think it stops at Rent, so it is pretty old. So then for the university course, we have 3 key texts that we use. So this one, which is A Critical Companion to the American Stage Musical by Elizabeth Wallman. It's brilliant for the social and economic context throughout history. And it's broken down into really clear chapters and subsections in the chapter. So it's really easy to use the index and the contents to find exactly what you need. Again, you don't have to read the whole thing. And then one of the best musical theater analysis writers is Scott Miller. He's got like 15 different books where he puts like maybe 10 musicals and he analyzes them like musically, staging wise, historically, in really, really friendly language. And then he also has just a general history book, which is Strike Up the Band. Now, again, this only goes to 2008. So you'll want to get something a little more contemporary. And then this book, which I said earlier, was co-edited by my friend, Robert Snyder. And this is 50 Key Stage Musicals. What I love about this is it's 50 essays on 50 different musicals written by different people, performers, academics, writers, composers. And the formula for this book was, without musical A, we wouldn't have musical B or C. The other great thing about this book is he also made a companion podcast series. So if you are not keen on reading, even though they're very short, they're short essays, so it's really easy to just read a short bit, there's a podcast episode for every single one, and I love podcasts. So that's also a great way to engage with the learning. So there's so many different formats. Podcasts are great, and then there are YouTube videos out there as well. And obviously YouTube is just a video library. So even just when we talk about going to the primary source, listening to the original cast, watch the original version if you can. There's a lot of footage available now, and that's a really great way to engage as well.
And if you are into books, but you're not really into non-fiction books, you could take books of the time. So if you're doing Little Women, you could read the original Alcott book. You could read stuff around that time so you feel immersed in the world. Also, if you are going to be, say, in the musical Oklahoma and you want to understand all the ideas of what the farmers were doing, there was a student of mine who went on to Performers and they did a version of this there, and she told me how they spent a day, a morning of actually doing some of these activities so that they were immersed in the world, and that on stage they could be really authentic in how they weaved a basket or whatever it might have been. So you could actually do the activity if you want to have something kinesthetic to do.
That's great. A tactile connection. Yeah, that's brilliant. Yeah, and living in the UK is really amazing because so much history is preserved here and accessible to do things like that. There's so many like Victorian villages and places where you can go where you can walk around and either see people dressed up or engage with the food or the shops or dress up yourself, experience these things. Obviously, you have like the historic royal palaces. I mean, goodness, if you're in Six, how many young people want to be in Six? Yeah, you can just go sing Six, sure. And Six is a history lesson. But you can also go to Hampton Court Palace and learn about all of the Six Wives and walk in the actual buildings where they would have walked in. How amazing is that? So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to engage in that experience. There isn't just, it's not just sit and read a book, for sure.
Something that I wonder is if we could start this earlier on in our interest. Like you said, you were, as soon as you knew you had a love for musical theatre, you were kind of at that library like a little Matilda.
Yeah, absolutely. Although my parents were definitely nice to me, so that's good.
No carrots launched down the
No, they didn't try to rip my books apart. No.
But something I have started to introduce into some lessons, and it really is based on the individual in front of you, is if I know somebody has got an interest in history and theatre, I've just been starting to put together some little fact cards and saying, pick one, which colour do you want, pink or blue? And they'll pick one, and then we'll read out the fact for them to take away and just get a little bit more of that contextual stuff immersed into their lessons a bit more.
That's brilliant. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. There's no reason why, even if you have really young students, they can't engage as well. I mean, I know that lyric analysis is something that's really great for kids to do. I mean, my children are 7 and 9, and they love history. I mean, come on, horrible histories. there's stuff in Horrible Histories that you can definitely apply to musical theater as well, to theater. So yeah, there's so many different ways to engage. And usually, you're absolutely right. If you make it fun, that's why the comedy in Horrible Histories is great, because you're just going to learn better. And also, if you give them choices, then if they get to be in charge of it, of their learning, then yeah, they absolutely, you can introduce it early. And that's a great way to introduce I think essentially with history, you're basically trying to get students to just say why. To just ask why. Why did that happen? Why are we listening to this person? Why are they in charge? Why? That's the question we need to ask. We need to keep asking that ourselves as human beings all the time. We're seeing so many things happening across the world right now, in our own home, in the US, so many things that are happening that are overwhelming. And a lot of the time, we just need to keep asking ourselves why. And then hopefully that deepens our understanding of the human experience and can bring us together as opposed to taking us apart. Yeah.
Are there any particular shows or composers or performers from the MT back catalogue that you think today's students should study a little bit more closely?
Oh, you've said so many things, composers and performers. Oh no. Well, in terms of composers, I would say someone that is contemporary, that is really, I think she's overlooked, is Janine Tesori. I mean, she has been acknowledged in terms of Tony Awards, but she's a really brilliant composer that I think the more you look into her work, the more exciting it is. She is a composer, not a lyricist. She always collaborates, but so does Andrew Lloyd Webber. He never writes his own words. But he's often considered like, oh, he's this great writer. But Janine Tesori is the same. And she never has the same sound. So she's done Shrek, which sounds completely different from Fun Home, which sounds completely different from Thoroughly Modern Millie, which sounds completely different from Caroline or Change. Every time you say one of her musicals, it's like a different person. And what's great about her is because she's contemporary, there are some really great interviews with her that you can find on YouTube where she talks about her process and also talks about her process with her lyricists or book writers. Yeah, she's really great. She's someone I think is worth looking into and exploring.
And actually, when we had Connor O'Hara on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, he actually mentioned 2 Tesori songs when he was making his list of contemporary musical theatre songs for males.
Which ones did he mention?
He mentioned Who I Be from Shrek.
Amazing. Yeah, great song.
And I think it was one from Violet.
Oh, Violet is so good. Oh my God. Violet, I'm going to get chills just thinking about Violet. Yeah, absolutely stunning. Yeah, she's along the lines of someone who, she is a great example of how understanding the context can change what you write. Because she writes based on the time, the genre. So Fun Home is the 1970s, and she's very much influenced by what was the music playing on the radio and what was I listening to, what would this character be listening to at the time, and then writing in that voice. Brilliant.
Molly, you have just submitted your final assessment of your final module on the BAST training level 5 qualification. How does it feel?
Oh, it's so strange. I mean, it's great, but sad at the same time because it's been a huge part of the last 2 years of my life. It's been applicable every step of the way to myself as a teacher and performer. So it does feel very strange that I'm done. And I keep trying to think of ways that I can keep engaging with it. How can I keep using this experience to carry on, keep the ball rolling in terms of research, creation, motivation? I would recommend it for sure to anyone who is either a performer who wants to move into teaching or who is a teacher and just feels like they need different tools because there's so much. And I will really miss engaging with the other students as well. But yeah, the mentorship, the support, it's all been really brilliant and really challenging pushing me in a way that I didn't think I could do. So yeah, it's been great. I think my husband will be quite grateful for me not telling him about the extrinsic neck muscles at 10 o'clock at night. So yeah, he's probably fine with me being done.
Can you tell us about your teaching? Where can we kind of get a lesson with you? What's your journey so far? Obviously, you're at Erdang.
Yeah, so I'm a freelance tutor at the university. I am looking to kind of increase some of that teaching, and I also teach locally in around Buckinghamshire. I have a home studio, and I teach at a dance studio where I teach group classes and one-to-ones. I'm at the moment not teaching online, but I am open to it if someone was interested. And I am looking, I'd like to say watch this space, because I'm in the process of creating and getting my website launched, which should include information about myself as a teacher and a performer, so you can get in contact. And I'm hoping to be able to do some guest spots, guest lecturing, and things like that. So yeah, it's a lot of things are sort of like coming soon. But you can also find me at the moment, you can find me on Instagram, Sing Happy with Molly. I am kind of looking towards getting off of social media for sort of personal, mental health, ethical reasons. So that's why I'm trying to get the website up. But I'm hoping to have some long form YouTube videos on my love of history and musical theater and the voice as well.
Oh, well, you've really inspired me on this podcast, Molly. I'm going to get those books. I really want to have those on my shelf and to get really stuck in with the detail, because I think that's what you've given us today, is detail of why this is really important for us as vocalists, as people going on the stage and relaying these stories to others. So thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure and so exciting to have you on the podcast talking about this topic.
Oh, thanks so much, Alexa. I mean, I could talk about it all day. So thanks so much.